I can like read, I can play games, I can do this and just stay in my room. But you need people in your life. You need to like build a support system. And the only way to do that is to like go to events.
Hello. Welcome, friends. Today I'm joined by Isabella Abate, Exeter class of 2018, and now she's studying college at Champlain in Vermont. Welcome, Isabella. Maybe you can start by introducing yourself, just a quick 30 or 60-second intro. Who are you? Where you're from? What do you do?
Yeah, sure. I'm Isabella. I'm originally from Boston, then I was in New Hampshire, and now I'm in Burlington, Vermont, studying creative media at Champlain College. That's really, that's where I ended up.
Okay, awesome. Well, maybe we can rewind, talk a little bit about high school, the college admissions process, how you ended up at Champlain, all that good stuff. So yeah, why don't we start off with high school, Isabella? What was she like? And maybe you can just guide us through how did you approach college?
Cool, yeah. So, for lack of a better term, I was sad. I was sad in high school. Mixture of like undiagnosed things and also just the pressure cooker that is Exeter. Didn't have the best time. I did graduate though, and that was my thing. I was like, I gotta graduate in 4 years. But the hard thing was I went on medical leave the spring of my junior year. So spring of upper year, I went on medical leave. So that was kind of when college admission process started. So I missed the beginning of that. I worked sort of with people like online and at home, but I didn't go like meet with college counseling and things like that until my senior year. Because I'm from Boston, there's colleges every like 30 feet. So I just did tours like when I had time, visited a bunch of colleges just that were around, kind of had my like list of like, okay, I want to like look here, apply like here. And I heard about Champlain through one of the women my parents and I worked with looking at colleges. She was like, I really think you'll like this school. Like the culture is really nice. People are pretty cool. I did want to go to a school in the city. She was like, yeah, it is kind of out of the way. But it was a time where I was like, I kind of want to prioritize mental health over like vibing in the city. So I visited a bunch of colleges, came up here, really liked it. People were really nice. City of Burlington is pretty fun. It kind of is like if you've ever been to like Cambridge, Mass, it's kind of like tiny Cambridge, same kind of vibe, but just like shrunk. My senior year when I went to see the college counseling, they hadn't heard of Champlain. The lady was like, I don't know where that is. And I was like, yeah, no, it's in Vermont. It's fun. So I was telling her about it and she was like, okay, yeah, sure, apply. So I applied to a bunch of schools, didn't get into most of them because my GPA was trash. And then I got in like here and another school and I ended up picking here. Not gonna lie, I didn't really work with college counseling that much.
I mean, it makes sense if you were on medical leave your junior spring. So when it comes to college, that transition from Exeter to Champlain, what was that like? I guess in some respects, Exeter and Champlain are kind of similar. They're both in the Northeast, kind of small, a little bit out of the way. But how are they different? Yeah. And maybe how have you grown since high school?
It's really interesting to look at the culture here actually, because Champlain is a really big feeder school for the video game industry. That is our like big claim to fame is video game programming, design, writing. Like it's a huge thing here. I remember one of the guys I met when I like first came here was a dude who worked on the PS4 Spider-Man game. That was pretty cool.
That's sick.
That's like a big thing here. And because they want to make sure that you're ready it's the same justification that Exeter has. If they want to make sure you're ready for the next step, they work you till you're dead, basically. So having an outside perspective on that, having done that all in high school, I'm seeing people who have never done it before and just sort of like the bad habits you kind of fall into. And I'm just like, oh, that's not a good thing. Oh, that's not normal. Okay, cool.
Can you give us some examples of those like bad habits or red flags to watch out for? Like if you're a high schooler, how can we avoid these pitfalls?
The big one definitely is burnout. It's just working until you can't work anymore. And obviously part of it is like procrastination. Like obviously everyone procrastinates. That's a thing. You're going to cram at some point, but there is the point where you need to like put a project down and like stop, get food, eat. But a lot of it really just is, it's like the competitiveness of like, there's only so many spots. We have to compete to get these certain spots, which is a mindset that yes, you kind of have to keep in mind, but you also need to not make that a priority. Otherwise you're going to feel really isolated.
I hear you. Can you talk a little bit more about your transition from Exeter to Champlain? You've already talked about, you came in with this kind of outsider perspective. You were like, I've been through this. I've seen this happen before. This looks really familiar. Let's not do that again. But maybe you could also talk about the transition socially or academically.
It was weird. It was really weird because I came here from Exeter where it's like everything is named, everything's about names. Everyone's kind of like done the same thing, kind of like same kind of vibe to, wait, where's that again? Wait, I've never heard of that school. Oh, that was the school in the news. I'm like, yep, that was Exeter. So, and also coming, like all the people I hung out with and interacted with all came from public school. So they would talk about things and I'd be like, what are you talking about? That's not a thing. And they'd be like, yeah, no, that's definitely a thing. interesting. So like a way people would get to know each other at one point was like comparing their like graduation cap. I was like, yeah, we didn't do that. We wore white and blazers, and they were like, that's really weird. But it really wasn't super difficult to interact with people just because I'm so used to living in the dorms. So that was like the least adjustment, with people like, I've done laundry, I lived in the building, like I know how to use like communal showers and stuff. That was like the least of my problems, which was interesting because a lot of people had a hard time with that. Obviously, if you've never lived away from home and this is your first time, you're like, I don't know what's going on. Everything is different versus you're at Exeter. There are day students, obviously, but even then you're still kind of in the like bubble of you live on the campus. You get used to it. The other thing was food. People complained about the dining hall food a lot. And I'm like, I don't know what you expected. It's a dining hall.
Yeah, it feels like you kind of had a one-up given the boarding school experience. What were the academics like? Maybe you can walk us through a little bit more of like what does a typical day at Champlain look like too?
Yeah, so I'm in the creative media major, which is basically like multimedia art. So I do like an amalgamation of different stuff. So basically when you like start until your junior year, you have to do this thing called core, which is what we do instead of science, math, English. It's basically different like history and philosophy kind of classes. And you have to take like math at one point, but it's basically doing that instead of kind of like throwing you into like science 110, just so you kind of do stuff that relates to what you're kind of learning. So you do that. And then you also take like your major classes, obviously. So currently I'm doing 3 core classes because I needed to catch up on a credit. Don't do that. That's a lot of papers. like just so many papers. But that was actually another thing adjusting was Exeter, you write papers every week. Like you write a lot of papers. That's kind of just how it is. Versus here, they're like, here's 1 paper, you'll write like 2. And I'm like, that's it? That's not a lot of papers. The skills you didn't think I need, crank out a paper in like an hour and a half. Don't do that. Yeah, and then you do like your major classes. Depends on, they go to like the studio or just in a classroom and kind of like interact with professors. Normal college stuff. The difference is we just don't have like big rooms. Classes will be like 20, 25 people.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, tell us more about like the size of Champlain. I imagine it's not the biggest school in America.
Yeah, it's not huge. It's big enough that you can go a while without running into somebody, but small enough that you'll kind of recognize faces. Like a core class in general, like a basic class would be like 20, 25 people max, and like room tables and rooms and stuff. But some classes, I was in a class that was just really small. There was like 7 of us, which was, I was used to because we're sitting around the table. It's like, oh yeah, it's like the Harkness thing. Versus some people are like, we're not sitting at desks all day. I'm like, yeah, no, I don't want to do that.
Gotcha. I'm still trying to get more of a sense of how you spend your time in college. Can you walk us through like an hour by hour, play by play? Obviously, every day is different. You know, some days you have more classes than others, but what does like a typical weekday look like for you?
Obviously, being remote, it's different. Sort of like online classes and things like that, it's different. But in general, at least nowadays, it'll be like the other day I had like a couple classes. I think it was like Irish history class for a core class. And then I had another class. And then I had like a little break where I went in my kitchen and made food. Came back, did my other class, and it was nice out, so I like walked down. So there's a big street down here called Church Street, which is basically where all like the shopping malls are. It's like half a mile long with like stores and stuff, so you walk down, get like food and stuff like that. So I walked up and down there and came back, and so on main campus there was a thing called The Grind, which is our like open mic. So I went to that and just kind of hung out. There was like, you get food at like the campus kind of like grill. It's called Grill, which I think is funny. Go to Grill, get food, go sit down at the open mic, watch, like a friend of mine is in one of the bands that plays there, so watch the band. One kid went up and sang Minecraft parody songs, which the crowd loved, which I think is indicative of the culture at Champlain. It's just like someone can go up and do that and people will be like, yes, fantastic content, this is what I want. Which I think was like kind of a weird shift from Exeter here, is that a lot of the people here were not cool in high school. They were not like pop, because it's gaming is like a big part of the school. And even if you're not in the game major, you still like, a lot of times people will take a game class or kind of just interact. It's like a nerdy school, like IT, things like that. So a lot of people who were here were not cool in high school. They really weren't. And I was not either. Coming here and being like, oh, everybody is like nerdy and a dork, so it doesn't matter. And being able to kind of be more just like, I don't care what people think kind of thing, as opposed to trying to put on like a performance, I guess.
Yeah, I never knew a college like this existed. It's really fascinating to hear about.
Obviously, it's not perfect. There is no perfect college, but I do like the culture.
What's one thing you would change about Champlain if you could?
It's white. It's really white. It is a white school. Obviously, I knew that coming in, middle of Vermont, not exactly the hub of diversity. That would definitely be the biggest one, but slowly it is changing. things are sort of changing, which is good.
Can you walk us through almost like a semester by semester breakdown of like what you've done? Maybe like what was your favorite semester, your least favorite, the highs and the lows?
So definitely the most like eventful one is like first year, first semester is obviously the most like you do a lot of things, you're coming in the first time. That's where I just in general, so in Exeter, I had my like 4 or 5 friends. I had my group of friends and I love them, great people. We don't get to see each other as much because pandemic, but I came into Champlain and was like, okay, I don't know anybody. I didn't talk to people like on Facebook, but you don't really know anybody. I'm gonna join a club. I'm gonna find a club. I want to join a club. And I'm looking at all the posters, and I see improv. There's an improv club. And I'm like, I'm vaguely amusing. I'll go audition for that. And I thought it would be like, like college improv clubs of like people just not being funny and just kind of vibing.
Yeah.
I get there and it's like a full like audition. And I'm like, oh, this is a lot more serious than I thought it would be. Because the guy who runs it is a professor. He worked with like Second City, which is a big like comedy thing in Chicago. So he takes it very seriously. So we're doing the auditions and people are like doing their thing. He's like, okay, cool, email if you like get in or not. And I'm like, oh, I didn't get in. Go and like looking at other clubs. I get the email. It's like, congrats, you're in the improv club. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And that kind of became my thing of like, at Exeter, it kind of reached the point where I was like, if anyone talks to me, I'll die. Please don't perceive me. I was just so anxious and like not in a great place mentally. So it was very much like, don't look at me, don't look at me, don't look at me. And coming from that of being so like guarded and having to put up like the facade almost to this room full of theater kids. For lack of a better term, like screaming and you have to be loud. So that sort of like allowed me to chill almost, come from such a rigid environment to be in a more like relaxed thing, but still have structure and sort of be able to be like, it's okay if you mess up, it's okay. You just like fix it and move on. So I think that was definitely the biggest adjustment, was going from Exeter, which was nobody look at me, to I'm now on stage screaming. Like I'm very fortunate to have gone to Exeter. I've had great experiences. I made great friends. I learned a lot, all things considered, but I definitely was not in like a good place mentally due to like the pressure cooker environment. And also because, so when I was at Exeter was when one of the many kind of like sexual assault scandals happened. And my advisor was the Reverend. When he got caught up in all of the like backlash almost, a lot of things got shifted and changed. I kind of went from having like a support system to he was gone now. So I was like, oh crap, I have to find a new advisor. And I found a new one, but it wasn't quite the same. Like the group wasn't quite the same. So there was a lot of like changing and turmoil and things like that. And also just in general, it is a very like stressful environment. And it's very like, you go from here, you go to the Ivies, you do this, you start your startup, billionaire, done. Like that's the end goal. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a really awesome thing to do. But if you don't follow that exact path, or you don't have like your exact path of like, oh, you're like a musician, so you do this, you do this, you do this, then they don't really know what to do with you. So they just kind of like, go, have fun.
Yeah, I totally agree with that sentiment. There's definitely like a track, whether it's formal or informal, there is some kind of pressure in order to conform, I would say, at times. I want to bring us back to Champlain, your first year, second year. Maybe you can talk to us more about the improv group. Sounds like really lovely. Sounds like your mental health improved as well. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, I know a lot of high schoolers these days are struggling with mental health. It's become so much more kind of public and something that kids talk about quite often. So how did you get better at managing that freshman year, sophomore year? Like, how was your mental health? Did it get better? Did it get worse? I'm sure there were like
all through high school, I struggled really, really badly with social anxiety and that sort of being a thing. Again, when I'm on medical leave junior year, came back senior year. And even then I was just kind of struggling. I was like, I just need to graduate. When I got here and I was looking at like resources and stuff, I was like, oh, I don't really know what I'm going to end up doing. It more just became like, I just need to figure out what I'm doing. And once I had that, I was able to sort of take a step back because I wasn't in an environment where 24/7 there was pressure on me all the time. I was able to be like, okay, why am I doing this? Why am I feeling like this? And sort of be like, oh, it's because of XYZ. And then also I got a different doctor and she was like, you also have ADHD. We should handle that. So I'm getting over I'm getting help for that, and that's just wildly better because it's like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So now I know how to handle like this situation. It's a lot of like, I'm trying to think of a good way to phrase it. Exeter is not like actively detrimental to mental health in a sense. They're not like actually trying to be like, I'm going to break you and they're like not kind of like that. But at the same time, they're not going to coddle you. They are very much, it's like going to college at 14.
Yeah, it is.
Which for some people is great. People need that. Some people really like the structure. I had cousins who went to Exeter, thrived, had a great time. At the same time, when you're like 14, 15, 16, that's a very like formidable time in your life. And if you don't have like a solid support system, then you're not going to have a great time mentally because you're not going to have any support. So coming to college and being able to build like a full support system was really just helpful.
How did you do that? Like, how did you build a support system from scratch in a new environment? What was that like?
So I'm very fortunate that my parents are very supportive of me. So I've always had them, which is very good. And I have a few close friends, but obviously we are not in the same spot. So coming here was trying to make friends. And I suffer from the thing of I assume I get close to people really quickly. Yeah, we're best friends. And they're like, I've met you once. And I'm like, that's fair. So I've interacted with a few people. I do have people I'm very friendly with on campus. I do have people I don't really talk to anymore. But it's sort of just at this point being here, I have two very close friends. They're actually moving into this apartment next year. You just need to interact with people. And I also learned that you might want to, if you're feeling bad, you might want to like sit in your room and like not interact with people and be like, I'm safe here. I can like read, I can play games, I can do this and just stay in my room. But you need people in your life. You need to like build a support system. And the only way to do that is to like go to events and like go places. And sometimes the events are lame. Like sometimes you don't want to go to like bingo on a Tuesday morning. Well, not morning, but like you don't want to go to bingo at 2 p.m. But people will be there and you get to talk to people.
I think that's a really, really great point, Isabella. And I think at some point in time, a lot of college students, high school students have been there. You're going through some stuff. Mental health isn't great. First reaction is to huddle underneath a blanket and watch some TV, binge something.
Feels safer.
It feels safer. So
like
I totally agree. Now for those kids, how do you get them like out of their comfort zone? That's like a big transition from there to the event. Yeah. What advice would you give to someone who's trying to make that jump?
I would say if you're first starting college, you might not want to, but get a roommate. Try to get into a room that has a room. Like you obviously don't want to share a space, especially if you've never shared one before.
Yeah.
And especially my first year, obviously first year rooms are always kind of cramped. We had 4 people in a room.
Wow. In one room.
It was pretty squished. Yeah, one room. We had bunk beds. It was fine. But that was almost good because it made me have to go out and interact with people. I hung out in the common room a lot, did homework down there, met a lot of people. If you have a roommate, A, there's less space, so you'll be more likely to go out and do things. And B, especially at the beginning, you have someone to go places with because they're not going to know anybody either. So even if you don't end up being like, oh, BFFs forever, like you don't need to do that. But especially at the beginning, it's good to just kind of be like, you're not walking into a room alone. Even if you go off and do different things, it's the fact that you're not going in alone. And that can sort of make you feel a little bit better about it. But like, okay, cool, I'm not the person, no one's going to like look at me walking in the door like, oh, look at that person who's like walking in by themselves. Isn't that kind of sad? Which it's not. But in your brain, you're like, oh my gosh, everyone's looking at me. Versus if you go with even just like a vague acquaintance, then you kind of have that like safety blanket.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I love that. I had suite mates, like our own room, but then we shared a common room my first year. And then my second year, everyone in my dorm had to have a roommate. And that was a really fun experience. And then junior, senior year, I started living with breakdance guys. And honestly, your living situation can really frame so much of your college experience and like how happy you are. It is something worth taking into consideration. All right, let's talk a little bit more about creative media, some of the jobs that you worked. Like, how did you get interested in creative media? What is that like? You mentioned some of the classes already, but I was wondering, like, I don't even think you can study that at many colleges.
Yeah,
brag about
it's basically just a fancy way of saying art. I'm an art major.
Okay.
Yeah, so when I was applying to colleges, I had no idea what I wanted to do. Because all through like growing up and all through Exeter, I really loved music. I was a musician. I sang, I did theater, I played the trombone for like 9 years, which I kind of want to pick up again, but it's hard in an apartment. But when I went on medical leave and sort of had a hard time and some spiraling, I couldn't play music because it was very stressful. It wasn't a thing that I could like put myself in doing. So that kind of became like, okay, what do I do besides music? What's something that I'm good at besides that? Because that's where I put all of my like worth of like, you're good at this. Now you're not doing this anymore. What you do? So I had to kind of sit back and be like, okay, I'm interested in this. I'm interested in this. I'm interested in this. Let's apply. So I applied to a bunch of schools I've always liked taking photos. So I applied with my photography, and I applied with the fact that I've always been interested in engineering and building, even though my grades are trash. I've always really liked that kind of stuff. And I applied for engineering, and it was pretty much, okay, whatever school lets me in is where I'm going to go. And the art schools let me in. So I was like, all right, doing art, sort of deciding between schools. I was deciding between like here and in Boston, Lesley University. I really liked the school. I really liked the facilities. but it was very narrow in the sense that like you had to do one thing and that was it. You did your photography or you did your drawing. So when I visited Champlain and they were like, oh, creative media, you can do more than one thing. I was like, what? They were like, yeah, we have visual arts, but if you're in creative media, you have like a primary and a secondary. You can do different stuff. And one of the options was sonic arts, so music and audio design. So I was like, oh, wait, cool. Can I do that? And they were like, yeah, totally. I ended up doing that. So in CREM, which is what we call it, because creative media is a long term, you have a primary and two like secondaries, which basically decides what classes you take. It sounds fancy, but it's really not. A primary in sonic arts with secondary in visual and moving images. Sounds fancy, but it's just music, film, photos.
Gotcha. Okay.
Cool. You gotta make it sound cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, how did you decide that sonic arts would be your primary focus?
Like at the revisit days, we met with a bunch of the professors and they sort of sold, they're like, oh, this is what we do in this one. This is what we do in this one. Cause there was like interactive media, writing, like different things. And the guy who's running sonic arts was just really cool. He was he's just a really cool dude. I like interacting with him and he knows his stuff. So when he was talking about it, he was talking about sort of sound in the sense of obviously music composition, but also how it affects other pieces of artwork. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. So I ended up talking to him about it and he was like, oh yeah, we do like XYZ. We talk about this. Here's a different class. And I was like, oh, I really want to do this. So I signed up for that. I've been taking courses in it. It's really fun. I think it's really interesting. My favorite's been I took a film scoring class, which was like probably one of my favorite classes I've ever taken here. It was really interesting because it's not just we obviously we scored films and stuff, but sort of talked about like, okay, why won't a film have music? What counts as like music? It's deeper in than just like studying. Like I don't study like music technique and composition, so it's a little bit different.
That's so cool. It's not like Juilliard where you're like practicing your instrument or studying music composition for hours.
Which nothing wrong with that. That's always really fun.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like the different side to it.
Yeah, I think that's so fantastic that you get to dabble with different kinds of arts. When you said like a one primary and two secondaries, this almost sounds like a video game character where they have like one main like skill point and then two side skills. Oh, well, you also worked on this recent project where you designed dresses by pop culture figures. Was that part of your Champlain curriculum? What was that?
That was last year. In creative media, we have to take portfolio classes, which is basically where you take all the stuff that you've learned and put it together and build like pieces of art, multimedia art, sort of what you focus on. I've always been into costumes and design. So I was like, okay, I've always been into pop culture. Let's see what I can make. So the project ended up being, I can find those files. They're somewhere in my computer. Dresses and sort of fashion based on Batman supervillains. And I thought it was fun. It was like, that's the kind of thing I'm very fortunate to be able to do in CREM is just kind of like mash everything together and see what happens. And that's a big one. They also stress like sending a message and activism, but I like mashing things together and seeing what happens.
Makes sense. That's what I think a lot of art is about. And at this time, just having the opportunity to play and explore is so wonderful. We're kind of nearing the end of our time. We maybe have a few more minutes, but if you want to talk about anything in specific, maybe if you have some words of advice for like a younger high school version of yourself, what would you tell like a younger Isabella?
Advocate for yourself is what I would say. It's easy to just kind of be quiet and be like, oh, I'll suffer, let's suffer alone, figure it out later. But the sooner you address an issue, the sooner it can be fixed. And the sooner you don't have to deal with it anymore. When you isolate yourself, it feels safer in the moment, but in the long run, you're just putting off a problem until it builds up and builds up and builds up. And then you're like, oh, I have a really big problem now. That would be my big advice, regardless of high school or where you are. For extra kids specifically, it would be, please get 8 hours of sleep. I know the culture is like, gotta get that grind all night, all day, but please sleep. It's not cool to be sleep deprived. Please just sleep.
Sometimes, doing what's most comfortable and easiest is just not the right way to take care of ourselves. And also, please sleep. You'd be surprised how many like people in high school have horrible sleep habits and it carries on to college. People's sleep habits.
Yeah, I had to reset my sleep. I still have not a great sleep schedule. I'm working on it though.
Yeah, it's not easy, and it's so important. Just mastering the basics like food, your diet, sleep, and exercise. I feel like in college, I saw a lot of people who just didn't have those things under control, and that can definitely affect your health as well.
You might think you can live off Pop-Tarts and Gatorade, but you can't. Don't do it.
Well, with that sage advice, then we might wrap it up. Well, thank you, Isabella, so much. This was really entertaining, and I learned so much about Champlain and creative and creme, as they call it. If you guys have any questions for Isabella, you guys can leave them in the comment section, and I'll pester her, and she can talk to you guys. But thank you so much for joining us, Isabella, and we'll catch you guys next time. Bye.